February 14th, 2019, Team Cherry drops a trailer that changes everything. Hollow Knight, Silksong. Flashes across screens worldwide. The internet explodes. Forums crash. Discord servers melt down. Everyone asks the same question. When? For 6.5 years, that question would define an entire community. This is the story of the longest wait in gaming history. How 3 developers in Australia accidentally created the most anticipated game ever made by doing absolutely nothing. How a community turned disappointment into art, silence into obsession, and waiting into a way of life. And how, when the wait finally ended in September 2025, it left behind something more valuable than any game could be. Welcome to the phenomenon that broke the internet's brain, the wait for Silksong. Now let's change the pace. Let's calm the dopamine-producing cuts and rapid edits. I want you to make things gentle. Get under your blankets and just be comfortable. If you're already tucked inside, that is good. If you aren't, find a place of rest. Let the tension of the day unspool like thread from a needle. Let your breathing slow. We're going to walk through this story not with anxiety, but with appreciation. We're going to tell the true history of this wait, fact by fact, moment by moment. So, close your eyes if you wish, or watch the screen dimly. Now, let's begin. Hollow Knight launched in 2017 to critical acclaim and modest success. Team Cherry, just 3 people, had created something special, but nobody predicted what came next. The game was a Kickstarter success with stretch goals, including one simple promise: Hornet as a playable character. But here's where the story gets interesting. That Kickstarter campaign in 2014 raised $57,138 Australian dollars, not exactly AAA money. The stretch goal for Hornet as a playable character was hit at $30,000. It seemed like a simple addition. Take the existing character, make her playable, add a few areas. Easy, right? Wrong. So incredibly wrong. What started as a small DLC expansion kept growing during development. New areas, new mechanics, new story elements. By early 2019, Team Cherry realised they weren't making DLC anymore. They were making a full sequel. The scope had exploded beyond anything they'd originally planned. What was supposed to be a few hours of content had become a full game rivaling the original in size and complexity. And here's where everything went sideways. They announced it would be free for Kickstarter backers and coming soon. That word, soon, would haunt the gaming community for the next 6 years. But let's talk about what soon meant in the context of Team Cherry's previous work. Hollow Knight itself had taken 3 years to develop, from 2014 to 2017. The team had a track record of taking their time, of polishing until everything was perfect. But somehow the gaming community convinced itself that Silksong would be different, so that it would be faster because they already had the engine, the art style, the core mechanics figured out. The community's optimism was infectious and completely misguided. Forums filled with predictions. Definitely 2019 they showed so much gameplay. Early 2020 at the latest, it looks nearly finished. Team Cherry wouldn't announce it if it wasn't close to done. Oh, sweet summer children. They had no idea what they were in for. The announcement trailer showed gorgeous hand-drawn animation, Hornet's acrobatic combat, and glimpses of a new kingdom called Farloom. It looked incredible. It looked finished. Surely this meant a 2019 release, right? Maybe early 2020 at the latest. The trailer was a masterclass in showing just enough to drive people insane. Hornet swinging through lush environments with her silk abilities, new enemies with intricate animations, a bell that seemed to be central to the story, combat that looked faster and more acrobatic than the original game, and that music, Christopher Larkin's haunting melodies that immediately transported viewers back to Hallownest while promising something entirely new. Frame by frame, the trailer revealed tantalizing details, new mechanics like the silk dash and needle combat, environments that range from overgrown gardens to mechanical workshops, NPCs that looked like they had stories to tell, boss fights that seemed epic in scope. Every second of that 2.5-minute trailer was packed with information that would be analysed obsessively for years to come. The community was electric with excitement. Reddit threads exploded with speculation. More YouTube channels dissected every frame of the trailer. Everyone had theories about release dates, story details, and new mechanics. The hype was real, and it was massive. r/Hollow Knight went from a modest community of about 100,000 subscribers to over 400,000 within months of the announcement. Discord servers that had been quiet suddenly buzzed with activity. Twitter hashtags trended. Gaming news sites wrote dozens of articles analysing the trailer. The indie game that could have just announced its sequel, and the internet lost its collective mind. But here's what nobody understood at the time. That trailer represented years of work, but it was still just the beginning. Team Cherry had shown their vision, their ambition, their artistic direction. What they hadn't shown was a release date, a development timeline, or any indication of how much work remained. The community filled in those blanks with optimism and wishful thinking. Then Team Cherry went silent. Not the usual "we'll update you soon" silence. Complete radio silence. No developer blogs. No progress updates. No social media engagement. Just nothing. And this wasn't gradual. It was immediate and total. The last substantial communication from Team Cherry about Silksong's development came in June 2019, just 4 months after the announcement. A brief blog post mentioning they were getting close to finishing the first area, and that the game was larger than we originally intended. Then, silence. Their Twitter account at Team Cherry Games became a digital ghost town. Months would pass between tweets, and when they did tweet, it was usually just retweeting fan art or thanking people for awards. No development updates, no screenshots, no "we're still working on it" reassurances. Nothing. In the modern gaming landscape, this was unprecedented. Publishers spend millions on marketing campaigns that span years. Developers maintain constant communication with their communities through Twitter, Discord, and regular updates. The idea of announcing a major sequel and then disappearing was unthinkable. CD Projekt Red kept fans updated on Cyberpunk 2077 development for years, with Night City Wire episodes, developer diaries, and constant social media engagement. Bethesda regularly teased Elder Scrolls 6 despite it being years away. Even small indie developers typically maintain blogs, post work-in-progress screenshots, or engage with their communities on social media. But Team Cherry isn't a traditional developer. They're 3 introverts in Australia who make games because they love making games. Ari Gibson handles art and design, creating the gorgeous hand-drawn animations that make Hollow Knight so visually stunning. William Pellen codes and designs, building the tight gameplay mechanics that make the game feel so responsive. Christopher Larkin composes the music, crafting the haunting melodies that define the game's emotional landscape. They don't have a marketing department, community managers, or PR team. They don't have shareholders demanding quarterly updates or publishers pushing for constant engagement. They just make games, and they make them the way they want to make them, on their own timeline, without external pressure. Now, this approach worked perfectly for Hollow Knight's development because nobody was watching. They could work in peace, iterate endlessly, and release when they felt the game was ready. But Silksong was different. Millions of people were watching, waiting, expecting updates. The pressure was immense, and Team Cherry's response was to retreat further into silence. This silence, which should have killed the hype, instead made it stronger. Every month without news became a story. Every gaming event without a Silksong announcement became an event itself. The absence of information created a vacuum that the community rushed to fill with speculation, theories, and eventually memes. The psychology behind this is fascinating and counterintuitive. In marketing, the general rule is that visibility equals success. The more people see your product, the more they want it. But Team Cherry accidentally discovered something different. Scarcity creates desire. The less information available about Silksong, the more precious each piece became. Think about it from a neurological perspective. When you know exactly when something will happen, your brain can relax. There's no mystery, no anticipation, no dopamine hit from uncertainty. But when you don't know when something will happen, when it could be any day, any week, any month, your brain stays in a constant state of anticipation. To understand what happened next, we need to talk about dopamine, that brain chemical that makes you feel good. Here's the thing. Your brain releases more dopamine when anticipating a reward than when actually getting it. It's called the anticipation effect, and it's why gambling is so addictive. The possibility of winning triggers more pleasure than actually winning. Team Cherry had accidentally created the perfect dopamine machine. Every potential announcement triggered that chemical response. Every silence made the next possibility more exciting. The community wasn't just waiting for a game anymore. They were addicted to the wait itself. But this wasn't just individual psychology. It was collective psychology. The community's shared anticipation created a feedback loop. When one person got excited about a potential announcement, that excitement spread to others. When disappointment hit, it was shared and processed collectively. The community became a single organism experiencing hope and disappointment together. The shared experience created bonds that went beyond typical fan communities. And these weren't just people who liked the same game. They were people who had suffered together, hoped together, and learned to cope with uncertainty together. The wait became a shared trauma that paradoxically brought people closer together. Silksong When became the universal greeting in gaming circles. Not hello or how's it going, but Silksong When. It started as a genuine question, evolved into a meme, and eventually became a form of digital prayer. The phrase spread beyond Hollow Knight communities, becoming shorthand for thing everyone wants but can't have. The evolution of this phrase tells the story of the community's emotional journey. In early 2019, Silksong When was asked with genuine expectation of an answer. People really thought someone might know, might have insider information. They might be able to provide a reasonable estimate. By 2020, the question had become tinged with desperation. Silksong when? Was asked, with the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had heard something. A rumour, a leak, a developer interview that mentioned a timeline. The community was still optimistic, but cracks were beginning to show. By 2021, Silksong when had become a cry of existential anguish. It wasn't really a question anymore. It was a statement of suffering, a shared acknowledgement of pain. The community had begun to accept that nobody knew when Silksong would release, possibly including Team Cherry themselves. By 2022, the phrase had transcended its original meaning entirely. Silksong when became a meme format, a way of expressing any kind of waiting or anticipation. Waiting for your food delivery? Food when? Waiting for your friend to text back. Reply when? The phrase had become a universal expression of human impatience and desire. The memes evolved with the community's emotional state, creating a visual timeline of their psychological journey. Early 2019, optimistic memes predicting a 2020 release, featuring bright colours and hopeful imagery. 2020, concerned memes asking, "Where is Silksong?" with worried-looking characters and question marks. 2021, desperate skeleton memes about waiting forever, featuring literal skeletons sitting at computers still waiting. These memes were dark but cathartic, allowing the community to laugh at their own suffering. The skeleton became the unofficial mascot of the wait, a representation of how they felt after years of anticipation. The 2022, acceptance memes claiming Silksong isn't real, featuring characters from The Matrix or conspiracy theory imagery. The community had reached a stage where they questioned whether the game actually existed, or if they had collectively imagined it. These memes were both funny and genuinely concerning, reflecting real psychological strain. 2023. Meta memes about making memes about waiting, featuring characters making memes about making memes. The community had become self-aware of their own behaviour, creating art about waiting. It was recursive suffering transformed into recursive humour. 2024, transcendent memes treating Silksong as a metaphor for the human condition, featuring philosophical imagery and existential themes. The wait had become so long that it had taken on spiritual significance. But Silksong wasn't just a game anymore. It was a symbol of hope, desire, and the human capacity to endure uncertainty. But the real phenomenon was Nintendo Directs, Nintendo's regular video presentations announcing new games. For the Silksong community, these became ritualized torture sessions. The pattern was always the same. Someone would post, "Guys, I know we've been hurt before, but this could be the one." The community would collectively put on clown makeup. Literally, this became a meme, acknowledging their foolishness while embracing hope. The Nintendo Direct cycle became the heartbeat of the Silksong community, a regular rhythm of hope and disappointment that structured their lives for years. Nintendo typically held 3 to 4 directs per year, plus occasional smaller presentations and third-party showcases. Each one was a potential Silksong announcement opportunity. The pre-direct ritual was elaborate and consistent. Days before each presentation, speculation would begin building on Reddit, Discord, and Twitter. Someone would inevitably post a theory about why this direct was different, why this time Silksong would definitely appear. The evidence was always thin. A suspicious gap in the presentation schedule, a cryptic tweet from Nintendo, or simply the fact that it had been too long. since the last disappointment. The clown makeup meme perfectly captured the community's relationship with hope. They knew they were being foolish. They knew they were setting themselves up for disappointment. They knew that statistically Silksong was unlikely to appear in any given direct, but they couldn't help themselves. Hope was stronger than logic. Holgan and the community embraced this contradiction by literally putting on clown makeup before each presentation. The makeup wasn't just metaphorical. Community members would post photos of themselves in actual clown makeup, creating elaborate face paint designs featuring Hornet, the Hollow Knight logo, or simply traditional red noses and painted smiles. It became a badge of honour, a way of saying, I know this is ridiculous, but I'm doing it anyway. Thousands would gather in Discord servers and Reddit threads to watch together. The energy was electric. This could be it. This could be the moment they'd been waiting for. The chat would explode with excitement at every indie game announcement, hoping it might be Silksong. Hearts would race when Nintendo teased one more thing at the end of presentations, and then nothing. No Silksong. Yet the community would sigh, make jokes about their clown makeup, and start the cycle over for the next direct. This happened dozens of times over 6 years. Each time they got hyped. Each time they were disappointed. Each time they came back for more. The Nintendo Direct cycle became the heartbeat of the community. Pre-direct hope, direct disappointment, post-direct recovery, then the slow build to the next one. The disappointment was real and painful. Community members would post about feeling genuinely sad after each direct, about the emotional toll of repeated hope and disappointment. Some would take breaks from the community after particularly crushing disappointments, needing time to recover before they could face the cycle again. But what made this remarkable wasn't the disappointment, it was how the community handled it. They turned their pain into art. They created support networks for managing expectations. When someone got too hyped and inevitably crashed, others would comfort them with the wisdom of veterans who'd survived multiple direct disappointments. The post-direct threads became group therapy sessions. It's okay, we'll get through this together. Remember, Team Cherry works on their own timeline. The wait will make it even sweeter when it finally happens. The community had developed sophisticated coping mechanisms for collective disappointment. We became a support group, explains one longtime community member. We were all going through the same thing. This weird mix of excitement and frustration and hope and despair. We understood each other in a way that people outside the community couldn't. The community developed its own language and rituals around disappointment. Taking the L became the phrase for accepting that Silksong wouldn't appear in a particular direct. Copium, a portmanteau of cope and opium, described the desperate hope that sustained them between disappointments. Hopium was the more positive version, acknowledging that hope itself had become a drug. These weren't just memes, they were coping mechanisms. By naming their experiences, the community could process them more effectively. By laughing at their own behaviour, they could continue engaging with it without being destroyed by it. The humour was therapeutic, transforming pain into connection. The community also developed sophisticated systems for managing expectations. Just expectation management became a regular topic of discussion, with veteran community members sharing strategies for staying hopeful without being crushed by disappointment. Some members practiced defensive pessimism, deliberately lowering their expectations to protect themselves emotionally. Others embraced radical acceptance, acknowledging that Silksong might never be released, and finding peace with that possibility. This wasn't giving up hope, it was holding hope lightly, without attachment to specific outcomes or timelines. It was a surprisingly mature response to an inherently immature situation. The community's emotional intelligence was remarkable. They recognized that their behavior was somewhat irrational, but they also recognized that irrationality wasn't necessarily bad. Hope doesn't have to be logical to be valuable. Like community doesn't have to be based on rational shared interest to be meaningful. Sometimes the most important human experiences are the ones that don't make perfect sense. The community developed its own mythology around Team Cherry and the development process. Team Cherry became mysterious figures, almost mythical in their silence. Every rare tweet was analysed like ancient scripture. Every public appearance was dissected for clues. The developers weren't just game makers anymore. They were enigmas, legends, the keepers of the most desired secret in gaming. Ari Gibson's art posts on Instagram became major events. When he would post a piece of Hollow Knight fan art or a sketch that might be related to Silksong, the community would analyse it obsessively. Was that background element from Silksong? Yeah, did that colour palette hint at new areas? Was the timing of the post significant? William Pellen's rare interviews became sacred texts. Every word was parsed for hidden meanings. When he mentioned in a 2021 interview that Silksong was progressing well, the community debated what well meant for months. When he said the game was bigger than expected, theories exploded about just how big it might be. Christopher Larkin's musical posts were treated with similar reverence. When he shared work-in-progress tracks that might be from Silksong, the community would listen obsessively, trying to decode story elements from musical themes. His compositions for other projects were analysed for techniques that might appear in Silksong's soundtrack. The mythology extended beyond the developers to the game itself, and Silksong became more than a sequel. It became a symbol of perfection, of artistic integrity, of the idea that good things come to those who wait. The community convinced itself that the long development time meant the game would be transcendent, that Team Cherry was crafting something so perfect it would justify every moment of waiting. This mythology was both beautiful and dangerous. Beautiful because it showed the community's faith in Team Cherry's artistic vision and their willingness to wait for quality over speed. Dangerous because it created expectations that no actual game could possibly meet. How could any game justify 6 years of anticipation and mythologizing? While Team Cherry stayed silent, an entire economy grew around Silksong's absence. Content creators found ways to make videos about a game that didn't exist. Now, this was unprecedented in gaming. An entire content ecosystem built around anticipation rather than actual content. Mossbag became the unofficial Hollow Knight lorekeeper, creating hours of analysis while fans waited for new content. His videos dissecting every aspect of Hollow Knight's world, story and characters became essential viewing for the community. When official content was scarce, fan analysis filled the void. Mossbag's deep dives into the game's mythology kept the community engaged with Team Cherry's world even when no new official content was available. But Mossbag wasn't alone. Dozens of content creators found ways to build audiences around Hollow Knight and Silksong speculation. Some focused on gameplay analysis, breaking down combat mechanics and speedrunning strategies. Others created lore videos, exploring the deeper meanings and connections within Hollow Knight's world. Still others made reaction videos, documenting their own journey through the wait. The most successful Silksong content creators were those who embraced the absurdity of their situation. They made videos titled "Analyzing Every Pixel of the Silksong Trailer" again, and "Why Silksong Will Definitely Release This Month, It Won't." They acknowledged that they were making content about nothing while simultaneously making that nothing into something entertaining and meaningful. Speedrunners pushed the original game to its limits, finding new tricks years after release. The speedrunning community became incredibly sophisticated, discovering glitches and optimizations that even the developers hadn't known about. Steel Soul mode runs, where death means starting over completely, became popular challenges. All Bindings runs, where players handicapped themselves with every possible difficulty modifier, pushed human skill to its absolute limits. The speedrunning community served an important function during the wait. They kept Hollow Knight feeling fresh and relevant by constantly finding new ways to play it. They created content that was genuinely new and exciting, even when the game itself was years old. They proved that a great game could sustain interest indefinitely if the community was creative and dedicated enough. Artists created thousands of fan art pieces imagining what Silksong might look like. The fan art community was incredibly prolific and talented, producing artwork that rivaled professional game art in quality and creativity. They drew Hornet in countless scenarios, imagined new areas of Farloom, and created crossover art featuring characters from other games. The fan art served multiple purposes. It kept the community visually engaged with the Silksong concept, even when no new official art was available. It allowed artists to practice and improve their skills while contributing to the community. And it created a shared visual language around Silksong, helping to define what the game meant to the community even before it was released. Musicians remixed Christopher Larkin's soundtrack, creating new arrangements and interpretations of beloved tracks. The music community was particularly creative, producing everything from orchestral arrangements to electronic remixes to acoustic covers. Some musicians created original compositions inspired by Hollow Knight's musical themes, imagining what Silksong's soundtrack might sound like. Writers crafted fan fiction exploring Hallownest's world and imagining Hornet's adventures in Farloom. The fan fiction community was surprisingly sophisticated, creating stories that explored the deeper themes and implications of Hollow Knight's world. Some writers focused on character development, exploring Hornet's psychology and motivations. Others created epic adventures, imagining the challenges she might face in Silksong. The absence of official content created space for fan creativity to flourish in unprecedented ways. When there's no new official material to consume, fans have to create their own. The Silksong community became incredibly creative out of necessity, and that creativity became one of the most valuable aspects of the waiting experience. YouTube channels dedicated to Hollow Knight news would post videos analysing every pixel of the few Silksong screenshots that existed. They'd break down the 2019 trailer frame by frame, looking for clues about mechanics, story and release dates. Some creators built entire careers on Silksong speculation, analysing Team Cherry's rare tweets and creating elaborate theories about development progress. The most dedicated content creators became digital archaeologists, preserving and analysing every scrap of Silksong information. They created detailed databases of every screenshot, every interview quote, every social media post that might contain clues about the game's development. They tracked Team Cherry's public appearances, noting changes in their demeanour or comments that might hint at progress. These creators developed sophisticated analytical techniques. They would compare screenshots from different time periods to identify changes or additions. They would analyze the lighting and composition of images to determine which areas might be connected. They would study enemy designs to theorize about combat mechanics and difficulty progression. The frame-by-frame analysis of the 2019 trailer became an art form in itself. Creators would slow the trailer down to individual frames, examining each one for details that might have been missed. They identified dozens of unique enemies, mapped out potential area connections, and created detailed theories about Hornet's moveset based on split-second glimpses of combat. Some of the most popular videos were Silksong news compilations that would gather every piece of information released in a given month or year. These videos were often depressingly short, sometimes just a few minutes covering an entire year's worth of news, but they served an important function for the community. They provided a sense of progress and continuity, even when actual progress was minimal. The irony was incredible. A game that didn't exist was supporting dozens of content creators and entertaining millions of viewers. Silksong was simultaneously the most successful unreleased game and the most successful released game that didn't exist. The content creation around Silksong also revealed something interesting about modern media consumption. Audiences were hungry for content about things they cared about, but even when there wasn't actually any new content to consume. The analysis, speculation and discussion became entertainment in their own right, separate from the actual game they were supposedly about. This phenomenon extended beyond YouTube to other platforms. Twitch streamers would hold Silksong speculation streams, spending hours discussing theories with their audiences. TikTok creators made short videos about Silksong memes and community moments. Twitter accounts dedicated to Silksong news would post daily updates, even when there was nothing new to report. The content ecosystem became self-sustaining. Creators would reference each other's theories, building on speculation to create even more elaborate speculation. Yes, the community developed its own internal logic and mythology that was separate from anything Team Cherry had actually said or shown. In some ways, the community's version of Silksong became more detailed and elaborate than the actual game could possibly be. From a business perspective, Team Cherry had accidentally created the most effective marketing campaign in gaming history, and it cost them nothing. Traditional game marketing is expensive, millions spent on trailers, ads, influencer partnerships, and media campaigns. Team Cherry announced Silksong, showed one trailer, and disappeared. Somehow, this created more sustained buzz than most AAA marketing budgets. Let's put this in perspective. Cyberpunk 2077's marketing budget was estimated at over $100 million. CD Projekt Red spent years creating Night City Wire episodes. Developer diaries, influencer partnerships, and massive advertising campaigns. The game was everywhere. Billboards, TV commercials, sponsored content, celebrity endorsements. And yet, Silksong generated more sustained discussion and anticipation with a single trailer and complete silence. The community did all the marketing work for free, creating content, spreading awareness, and maintaining interest for years without any input from Team Cherry. It was the most efficient marketing campaign ever created, achieved entirely by accident. The silence created scarcity, and scarcity creates value. Every piece of Silksong information became precious because information was so rare. The lack of details allowed imaginations to run wild, creating expectations that no actual game could meet. But here's the genius part. Team Cherry never promised perfection. They just existed, quietly working, letting the community's imagination do all the marketing. This approach wouldn't work for most developers or publishers. It required a specific set of circumstances: a beloved original game, a small team with no external pressure, and a community willing to wait indefinitely. Most publishers would have panicked at the silence and demanded regular updates. Most developers would have cracked under the pressure and started communicating more frequently. But Team Cherry's silence was authentic. They weren't playing marketing games or manipulating the community's emotions. They were just working the way they'd always worked, quietly, methodically, without external interference. The community's response was organic, not manufactured. The anticipation was real, not artificially generated. The business implications were staggering. Silksong had essentially unlimited marketing reach without spending $1 on advertising. Every meme, every speculation video, every community discussion was free marketing. The game's cultural impact was massive before it even existed. When it finally released, it would have the kind of built-in audience that most games could only dream of. The phenomenon also demonstrated the power of community-driven marketing in the digital age. Traditional marketing is top-down. Companies create messages and push them to consumers. But the Silksong community created their own messages, their own content, their own reasons to care about the game. They became active participants in the marketing process rather than passive recipients of marketing messages. This shift from passive to active marketing engagement was revolutionary. The community wasn't just consuming marketing content, they were creating it. They weren't just waiting for the game, they were building anticipation for it. They weren't just fans, they were unpaid marketing partners, and they were doing it because they wanted to, not because they were being paid or manipulated. By 2022, Silksong had transcended gaming entirely. Silksong When became a meme format applied to anything people were waiting for. Half-Life 3 When, Winds of Winter, When, my dad coming back from the store when. The game appeared in memes about other delayed projects, becoming shorthand for eternal anticipation. The phrase had evolved beyond its original context to become a universal expression of waiting and desire. It appeared in memes about everything from government policy to personal relationships. Student loan forgiveness when? Affordable housing when? World peace when? The format was instantly recognizable and universally understood, even by people who had never heard of Hollow Knight. This linguistic evolution was remarkable. A phrase born from a specific gaming community had entered general internet culture and even mainstream consciousness. Late-night talk show hosts made jokes about Silksong. Gaming journalists used it as shorthand for any delayed project. The phrase had achieved the kind of cultural penetration that marketing executives spend millions trying to achieve. The gaming journalists started using Silksong as a benchmark. This is the most anticipated game since Silksong became common phrasing. A game that didn't exist had become the standard by which all other anticipated games were measured. The concept of Silksonging entered the vocabulary, announcing something exciting, then going completely silent about it. Other developers began to reference the Silksong phenomenon in their own marketing and communication strategies. Some tried to replicate Team Cherry's approach, announcing games and then going silent. Most discovered that silence without the foundation of trust and quality that Team Cherry had built just led to abandonment and frustration. Others went the opposite direction, providing constant updates and communication specifically to avoid creating a Silksong situation. The phenomenon became both inspiration and cautionary tale, showing the power of community anticipation while demonstrating the dangers of unmanaged expectations. The cultural impact extended into academic circles. Researchers studying fan communities, marketing psychology, and digital culture began examining the Silksong phenomenon as a case study. Papers were written about the community's behaviour, the psychology of anticipation, and the changing relationship between developers and fans in the digital age. The phenomenon also influenced other forms of media. Authors began experimenting with Silksong marketing, announcing books and then going silent to build anticipation. Musicians tried similar approaches with album releases. The strategy rarely worked outside of gaming, but the attempts showed how influential the Silksong model had become. The meme format's success revealed something important about internet culture and human psychology. People were drawn to the idea of eternal waiting, of desire that could never be fulfilled. There was something both tragic and comic about the concept that resonated across different communities and contexts. The universality of the when format also showed how the Silksong community's experience had tapped into something fundamental about the human condition. Everyone was waiting for something. Everyone had desires that seemed perpetually out of reach. The Silksong community had just made that universal experience visible and shareable. But behind the memes and cultural impact were real people dealing with real pressure. Team Cherry went from unknown indie developers to some of the most watched figures in gaming. Every rare public appearance was scrutinized. Every tweet was analyzed. Every silence was interpreted as either good or bad news. The pressure must have been immense. Imagine trying to create art while millions of people watch your every move, waiting for you to deliver something that justifies years of their anticipation. That's not a creative environment, that's a pressure cooker. Ari Gibson, the artist and co-director, had always been a private person who preferred to let his art speak for itself. Suddenly, his Instagram posts were being analysed by thousands of people looking for clues about Silksong's development. Every sketch, every colour choice, every posting schedule was interpreted as meaningful. The pressure to communicate without actually communicating anything substantial must have been exhausting. William Pellon, the programmer and co-director, faced similar scrutiny. His rare interviews were dissected word by word. When he mentioned in a 2021 podcast that the game was coming along well, the community spent weeks debating what well meant. Was it 50% complete? 90% complete? Was well better or worse than good? The level of analysis was both flattering and probably terrifying. Christopher Larkin, the composer, had the unique challenge of creating music that would live up to years of anticipation. Hollow Knight's soundtrack was beloved by the community, and expectations for Silksong's music were impossibly high. Yes, every musical post on his social media was analysed for potential Silksong content. The pressure to create something that would justify the wait must have been enormous. The team's silence wasn't just a marketing strategy, it was probably a survival mechanism. How do you communicate with a community that analyses every word you say? How do you manage expectations when any statement you make will be interpreted as a promise? How do you work creatively when millions of people are watching and waiting? The community dealt with its own trauma. Years of hope and disappointment took their toll. Some fans became angry at Team Cherry for the long wait. Others became defensive of the developers, creating internal conflicts. Mental health became a genuine concern as the cycle of hope and disappointment repeated dozens of times over years. The anger was understandable but misdirected. Fans felt like Team Cherry owed them communication, updates and transparency. They had invested years of emotional energy in anticipating the game, and the silence felt like betrayal. Some fans accused Team Cherry of being unprofessional, of not caring about their community, of deliberately torturing their fans with silence. But the defensive fans understood something important. Team Cherry didn't owe the community anything beyond making the best game they could. The developers had never promised regular updates or communication. They had simply announced a game and then worked on it. The community's expectations were self-imposed, not developer-imposed. The internal conflicts were painful to watch. Long-time community members would argue about whether criticism of Team Cherry was justified. Some felt that any criticism was toxic and harmful. Others felt that blind defense of the developers was equally problematic. The community that had been united in anticipation became divided over how to handle their frustration. There were people who had been waiting since high school and were now married with kids, one community moderator explains. The wait became a significant part of people's lives. Some people's entire relationship with gaming was defined by waiting for this one game. This wasn't hyperbole. Community members would mark major life events in relation to the Silksong announcement. I started waiting when I was in college. Now I have a mortgage. I've been through 3 jobs, 2 relationships, and a global pandemic, as you're still waiting for Silksong. The game became a temporal anchor around which their lives revolved. The psychological impact was real and measurable. Community members reported symptoms of anxiety, depression, and obsessive behaviour related to their Silksong anticipation. The constant cycle of hope and disappointment was emotionally exhausting. Some people found themselves checking Team Cherry's social media multiple times per day, looking for any sign of news. The compulsive checking behaviour was particularly concerning. Members would refresh Reddit, Twitter and Discord constantly, afraid they might miss some crucial piece of information. They would set up notifications for any mention of Team Cherry or Silksong. They would analyse the timing of posts, looking for patterns that might predict when news would come. Community leaders started posting reminders about managing expectations and taking breaks from Silksong speculation. Support networks formed. The community took care of its own in ways that were both touching and necessary. The mental health discussions became increasingly sophisticated and important. Community members shared strategies for managing anticipation anxiety. They discussed the psychology of waiting and the importance of finding meaning in the present moment rather than constantly focusing on future possibilities. Some members practiced Silksong detox, deliberately avoiding news and speculation to break the anticipation cycle. They would leave the community for weeks or months, focusing on other games and interests. When they returned, they often reported feeling healthier and more balanced, though the anticipation would inevitably return. Others embraced radical acceptance, acknowledging that Silksong might never be released and finding peace with that possibility. This wasn't giving up hope, but rather holding hope lightly, without attachment to specific outcomes or timelines. It was a surprisingly mature response to an inherently immature situation. The wait revealed something profound about modern culture and our relationship with anticipation. We live in an era of instant gratification. We can stream any movie, order any product, access any information within seconds. But Silksong represented something different, the power of delayed gratification. of waiting for something special. In a world where everything is available immediately, the Silksong community chose to wait. They could have moved on to other games, have found other interests, satisfied their gaming desires with the thousands of other titles available. But they didn't. They chose to wait for something specific, something they believed would be worth the wait. This choice revealed something important about human nature and desire. Sometimes the things we want most are the things we can't have immediately. Sometimes the anticipation is more valuable than the fulfillment. Sometimes waiting becomes its own form of meaning-making, its own way of finding purpose and community. The phenomenon highlighted the changing relationship between developers and communities. Traditional game development was one way. Developers made games, players bought them. But the Silksong community became active participants in the game's cultural existence before it even released. They created art, theories, memes, and content. They kept the game alive in public consciousness through sheer force of will. This shift from passive consumption to active participation was revolutionary. The community wasn't just waiting for a product. They were co-creating its cultural significance. They weren't just fans. They were collaborators in building the game's meaning and importance. The relationship between developer and community had evolved into something more complex and symbiotic. The community's role in creating Silksong's cultural significance raised interesting questions about authorship and ownership. Who really created Silksong's cultural impact? Team Cherry, who made the game, or the community, who built its mythology and maintained its relevance? The answer was probably both, and working together in ways that neither side fully understood or controlled. The success of the wait influenced other developers. Some tried to replicate Team Cherry's approach, announcing games then going silent. Most discovered that silence without trust leads to abandonment, not anticipation. The Silksong community's loyalty was built on Hollow Knight's quality and Team Cherry's proven reliability. The attempts to replicate the Silksong phenomenon were fascinating case studies in why the approach worked for Team Cherry but not for others. Several indie developers announced games with great fanfare and then went silent, hoping to build similar anticipation. Almost all of these attempts failed because they lacked the crucial foundation that made the Silksong wait possible. First, they lacked the trust that Team Cherry had built with Hollow Knight. The Silksong community was willing to wait because they had experienced Team Cherry's craftsmanship firsthand. They knew the developers were capable of creating something special because they had already done it. New developers trying to replicate the approach didn't have that foundation of trust. Second, they lacked the authentic reason for silence. Team Cherry's silence wasn't a marketing strategy, it was their natural working style. They were introverts who preferred to work quietly and let their art speak for itself. Developers who tried to manufacture similar silence often came across as inauthentic or manipulative. Third, they lacked the community that was willing to sustain the wait. The Silksong community was uniquely dedicated and creative, easily willing to create their own content and meaning during the silence. Most gaming communities aren't willing or able to sustain that level of engagement without regular official content. Other developers went the opposite direction, providing constant updates to avoid creating a Silksong situation. The phenomenon became both inspiration and cautionary tale, showing the power of community anticipation while demonstrating the dangers of unmanaged expectations. The anti-Silksong approach became common among indie developers who had witnessed the community's frustration and didn't want to put their own fans through similar experiences. These developers would provide weekly or monthly updates, share work-in-progress screenshots, and maintain constant communication with their communities. This approach had its own benefits and drawbacks. Constant communication kept communities engaged and prevented the anxiety and frustration that came with silence. But it also meant that every development setback became public, every change in direction had to be explained, and every delay required justification. The transparency that prevented Silksong-style anticipation also created its own pressures and challenges. The contrast between these approaches highlighted the fundamental tension in modern game development between transparency and creative freedom. Developers who communicated constantly satisfied their community's desire for information, but sacrificed some creative flexibility. Developers who worked in silence maintained creative control but risked community frustration and abandonment. As years passed, the wait itself became entertainment. The community developed elaborate rituals around their anticipation. Silksong bingo cards filled with potential announcement venues and dates, clown makeup tutorials before Nintendo Directs, community calendars based on gaming events, each a potential Silksong announcement opportunity. The Silksong bingo phenomenon was particularly creative and revealing. Community members would create bingo cards filled with predictions about potential Silksong announcements. Squares might include appears in Nintendo Direct, gets release date, new trailer drops, Team Cherry breaks silence, or turns out to be fake news. The cards were both hopeful and cynical, acknowledging the community's desire for news while recognizing the likelihood of disappointment. The bingo cards became a way of gamifying the wait, turning the potentially frustrating experience of anticipation into something playful and engaging. Community members would compete to see who could predict announcement details most accurately, creating a meta-game around the game they were waiting for. The clown makeup tutorials were even more elaborate. Community members would create detailed video guides for applying clown makeup before Nintendo Directs, complete with product recommendations and step-by-step instructions. The tutorials were both sincere and ironic, acknowledging the foolishness of getting hyped, while providing practical guidance for embracing that foolishness. The makeup became increasingly elaborate over time. Early tutorials focused on simple red noses and painted smiles. Later tutorials included full face paint, elaborate designs featuring Hollow Knight characters, and even costume elements. The community was investing significant time and effort in their ritual of acknowledged foolishness. Community calendars tracking gaming events became essential resources for the Silksong community. Members would create detailed schedules of every potential announcement opportunity, Nintendo Directs, indie game showcases, gaming conventions, award shows, and developer conferences. Each event was a potential Silksong moment, and the community prepared for all of them. The calendars revealed the community's sophisticated understanding of the gaming industry's announcement patterns. They knew which events were most likely to feature indie games, which had historically included surprise announcements, and which were focused on specific platforms or genres. Yet their knowledge of industry timing and patterns rivaled that of professional gaming journalists. Fan theories became increasingly elaborate. People analysed screenshots for story clues, created detailed release timelines based on Team Cherry's previous patterns, and read meaning into every public statement or social media interaction. The speculation became more entertaining than most actual games. A massive ARG where the prize was information about a game that might not exist. The theory crafting community was incredibly sophisticated and creative. They developed elaborate frameworks for analysing the limited information available about Silksong. Every screenshot was examined pixel by pixel. Every interview quote was parsed for hidden meanings. Every social media interaction was interpreted as potentially significant. Always one of the most popular theories involved analysing the geography shown in Silksong screenshots to create detailed maps of Falloum. Community members would compare different images, looking for connecting elements, and trying to understand how the various areas related to each other. They created elaborate diagrams showing potential progression routes and area connections. Another major theory focused on Hornet's abilities and how they might differ from the Knight's moveset in Hollow Knight. Community members analysed every frame of combat shown in the trailer, identifying new moves and speculating about how they might work mechanically. They created detailed breakdowns of Hornet's silk abilities, her needle combat, and her apparent increased mobility compared to the Knight. Story theories were particularly elaborate, often drawing on deep knowledge of Hollow Knight's lore and mythology. Community members speculated about Hornet's role in Falloum, her relationship to the kingdom's inhabitants, and how the events of Silksong might connect to the broader Hollow Knight universe. These theories often involved complex interpretations of symbolic elements and thematic connections. The most dedicated theorists became community celebrities in their own right. Their posts would generate hundreds of comments and discussions. Other community members would build on their theories, creating elaborate collaborative interpretations of Silksong's potential content. The theory crafting became a form of collaborative storytelling, with the community collectively imagining what the game might be. And the theories also served an important psychological function for the community. They provided a sense of progress and discovery, even when no new official information was available. By analysing and reanalyzing the same limited content, community members could feel like they were learning new things about Silksong, even when nothing new had actually been revealed. The community's relationship with time became distorted. Members marked life events in relation to Silksong's announcement. I started waiting in high school, now I'm married with kids. I've been through 3 jobs, 2 relationships, and a global pandemic, still waiting for Silksong. The game became a temporal anchor around which their lives revolved. This temporal distortion was one of the most fascinating aspects of the Silksong phenomenon. The game existed outside of normal time, creating its own chronology based on community events rather than calendar dates. Community members would reference the Great Nintendo Direct Disappointment of 2021, or the Screenshot Analysis Era of 2020, as if they were historical periods. The community developed its own calendar based on Silksong-related events. The announcement date, February 14th, 2019, became a kind of New Year's Day. Nintendo Directs became holidays, complete with preparation rituals and post-event processing. Team Cherry's rare communications became historical moments, referenced and remembered years later. This created unique bonds deeper than typical fan communities. They had collectively experienced years of hope and disappointment, creating digital kinship that transcended geography and culture. For Yi, the shared trauma of waiting became a form of community identity that was both beautiful and slightly concerning. The bonds formed during the wait were genuine and lasting. Community members who had never met in person felt like they had been through something significant together. and they had. They had shared years of emotional highs and lows, supported each other through disappointments, and celebrated small victories together. These relationships often extended beyond Silksong into other areas of life. Community members would share personal milestones, offer support during difficult times, and maintain friendships that had nothing to do with gaming. The Silksong wait had brought them together, but the connections they formed were about much more than just waiting for a game. The community also developed its own internal culture and traditions that were separate from the broader gaming community. They had inside jokes that only made sense to people who had lived through the wait. They had shared references and experiences that created a sense of belonging and identity. This cultural development was remarkable because it happened organically, without any official guidance or structure. The community created its own traditions, its own language, its own ways of understanding and processing their shared experience. They became a genuine subculture within the broader gaming community. The COVID-19 pandemic hit just as the community settled into its long wait. Suddenly, everyone was stuck at home with nothing but time to think about Silksong. The pandemic created perfect conditions for obsessive anticipation, isolation, anxiety, and desperate need for something to look forward to. Silksong became a beacon of hope in uncertain times. The timing was almost cruelly perfect. March 2020 brought lockdowns, social distancing, and a global sense of uncertainty about the future. People were stuck at home, separated from friends and family, dealing with job losses and health fears. In this context, the Silksong community's shared anticipation became more than just gaming enthusiasm. It became a form of collective therapy. During lockdowns, Nintendo Direct watch parties became crucial social events. The shared disappointment when Silksong didn't appear became communal catharsis, a way of processing larger disappointments and uncertainties of the pandemic era. The community's online gatherings provided connection during unprecedented isolation. The pandemic also intensified the community's relationship with time and waiting. When the entire world was in a state of suspended animation, waiting for vaccines, waiting for normalcy, waiting for the pandemic to end, the Silksong community's experience of eternal waiting suddenly felt universal. Everyone was waiting for something that might never come. The community's expertise in managing disappointment and uncertainty became valuable during the pandemic. They had spent years learning how to hope without being crushed by disappointment, how to find meaning in waiting, how to support each other through difficult times. These skills were suddenly relevant to everyone's daily life. Community members reported that their experience waiting for Silksong had prepared them psychologically for the pandemic. They knew how to manage anxiety about uncertain timelines. They knew how to find joy and connection even when the thing they were waiting for seemed impossibly distant. They knew how to support each other through collective disappointment and frustration. The pandemic also created new parallels between the Silksong wait and broader cultural experiences. Just as the community had learned to live with uncertainty about when Silksong would release, everyone had to learn to live with uncertainty about when the pandemic would end. The community's coping strategies became relevant to a much broader audience. The community also grappled with a complex paradox. They desperately wanted Silksong released, but feared that getting it would end the unique experience they'd built around waiting. This created post-Silksong depression anxiety. The idea that once the game released, the community would lose its defining characteristic and slowly dissolve. This paradox revealed something profound about the nature of desire and fulfillment. The community had built their identity around wanting something they couldn't have. What would happen to that identity once they got what they wanted? Would the fulfillment be worth the loss of the anticipation that had brought them together? Some members began practicing Silksong detox, deliberately avoiding news and speculation to break the anticipation cycle. Others embraced the wait as meditation, a practice in patience and acceptance. The community became inadvertently philosophical, using their shared experience to explore fundamental questions about desire, satisfaction, and happiness. The philosophical discussions that emerged from the wait were surprisingly sophisticated. Community members explored questions about the nature of time, the relationship between anticipation and fulfillment, and the meaning of hope in the face of uncertainty. These weren't abstract academic discussions. They were practical explorations of how to live meaningfully while waiting for something that might never come. The community's philosophical evolution was remarkable to witness. They had started as a group of gamers excited about a sequel and evolved into something resembling a philosophical community focused on finding meaning in uncertainty and connection in shared experience. The wait had changed them, mostly for the better. The wait coincided with major changes in the gaming industry that made Team Cherry's approach increasingly unusual. The rise of early access, live service models, and constant developer communication created expectations of transparency and regular updates. Team Cherry's silence stood out more starkly against this backdrop of industry-wide overcommunication. The gaming industry's evolution toward constant communication and transparency made Team Cherry's approach seem increasingly anachronistic. Most developers now maintained active social media presences, provided regular development updates, and engaged directly with their communities. The idea of announcing a game and then going silent for years was almost unthinkable in the modern gaming landscape. Yet this contrast highlighted the tension between traditional creative processes and modern audience expectations. Team Cherry was working the way artists had always worked, quietly, methodically, without external interference. But their audience had been conditioned by the modern gaming industry to expect constant updates and communication. The community watched other highly anticipated games get announced, updated regularly, and released while Silksong remained in development limbo. Games like Cyberpunk 2077, announced after Silksong but released years earlier, became points of comparison and frustration. The community had to accept that their wait was unusually long, even by game development standards. These comparisons were both helpful and harmful for the community. On one hand, they provided perspective about normal development timelines and helped community members understand that their wait was genuinely unusual. On the other hand, they created additional frustration and anxiety about why Silksong was taking so much longer than other games. The community developed sophisticated understanding of game development through their long wait. They learned about small team challenges, game design complexities, and pressures of following up successful games. This education was self-directed, driven by desire to understand why Silksong was taking so long and what Team Cherry might be experiencing. This understanding made the community more empathetic toward developers generally, not just Team Cherry. They became advocates for patient, sustainable development practices and critics of crunch culture and unrealistic deadlines. The Silksong community's waiting experience made them valuable voices in broader discussions about game development ethics. Understanding Team Cherry's philosophy helped the community make peace with the wait. They were perfectionists who prioritized creative vision over commercial pressure, introverts who preferred letting their work speak rather than engaging in self-promotion. But this understanding created new anxieties. What if Team Cherry were trapped in endless refinement cycles, never satisfied enough to release? The fear of perfectionist paralysis became a real concern for the community. They worried that Team Cherry might be trapped in endless iteration, on constantly improving and refining the game but never feeling satisfied enough to release it. This fear was based on understanding the developers' perfectionist tendencies and their commitment to quality over speed. The community's hunger for information became increasingly complex. Every piece of Silksong information was precious and analysed exhaustively. Screenshots were examined pixel by pixel. The 2019 trailer was broken down frame by frame. Interviews were parsed for hidden meanings. The community became expert detectives, finding significance in minute details. But this information hunger created anxiety. Members obsessively checked Team Cherry's social media, gaming news sites, and community forums for any hint of news. The constant vigilance was exhausting, but many felt they couldn't afford to miss even the smallest update. This created compulsive checking cycles that many recognized as unhealthy, but found difficult to break. The scarcity of official information created a thriving ecosystem of speculation and theory crafting. Community members spent hours analyzing available information, creating elaborate theories about story mechanics and release timelines. These theories became entertainment in themselves, with popular theorists gaining followings and ideas being debated and refined. The most popular theories often reflected the community's desires and fears as much as actual game details. Story theories focused on themes of waiting, patience, and eventual reward, clearly mirroring the community's experience. Mechanic theories emphasized perseverance and gradual progress, again reflecting their journey through the long wait. The community's Hollow Knight expertise became encyclopedic during the Silksong wait. With no new content to analyze, members dove deeper into the original game, finding connections and meanings that even developers might not have intended. This deep analysis kept the community engaged with Team Cherry's work while preparing them to fully appreciate Silksong when it arrived. The lore analysis became a way to feel closer to Team Cherry's creative process. By understanding Hollow Knight's intricate world building, the community felt better equipped to appreciate the care and attention Team Cherry invested in their work. This reinforced faith that Silksong would be worth the wait, because they'd seen Team Cherry's craftsmanship firsthand. The community's dedication to preserving and analysing Hollow Knight lore served as cultural preservation. They created wikis, databases, and archives documenting every aspect of the game in exhaustive detail. These resources became invaluable for newcomers and gaming scholars studying indie game cultural impact. The wait created unique nostalgia within the community. Members reminisced about the early days when they believed the game might release within a year or two. They shared screenshots of old posts predicting dates that had long passed. They laughed about former naivety while mourning the loss of innocent optimism. This nostalgia created layered temporal experience. They simultaneously lived in the present moment of waiting, remembered past moments of the wait, and imagined future moments when waiting would end. The wait itself had become a rich, complex experience with its own history, traditions, and emotional landscape. The community developed sophisticated understanding of game development through their long wait. They learned about small team challenges, game design complexities, and pressures of following up successful games. This education was self-directed, driven by desire to understand why Silksong was taking so long and what Team Cherry might be experiencing. This understanding made the community more empathetic toward developers generally, not just Team Cherry. They became advocates for patient, sustainable development practices and critics of crunch culture and unrealistic deadlines. The Silksong community's waiting experience made them valuable voices in broader discussions about game development ethics. The community's influence extended beyond gaming into other internet culture areas. The Silksong Wen meme format was adopted by other communities waiting for anticipated releases in movies, books, music, and other media. Their strategies for managing disappointment and maintaining hope were studied and emulated by other groups facing long waits or uncertain outcomes. The Silksong community became a case study for researchers interested in online communities, fan culture, and anticipation psychology. Academic papers were written about their behaviour, coping strategies, and unique relationship with uncertainty. Community members were generally welcoming to researchers, perhaps because they were as curious about their own behaviour as outside observers. The community's self-documentation was extensive and valuable for researchers. They created detailed records of their own evolution, tracking changes in attitudes, behaviours, and coping strategies over years of waiting. This self-documentation was both community memory and a resource for understanding how online communities adapt to prolonged uncertainty. The wait coincided with broader cultural conversations about mental health, particularly around anxiety and depression. The community's open discussions about psychological effects of prolonged anticipation contributed to these conversations, helping normalize mental health discussions in gaming communities and online spaces generally. Many community members reported that waiting for Silksong taught them valuable lessons about managing anxiety, dealing with uncertainty, and finding meaning in difficult experiences. These lessons often extended beyond gaming into personal and professional lives. The wait became unintentional therapy, teaching patience, resilience, and community support importance. The community's humour as coping mechanism became influential in other online spaces. Their ability to find comedy in suffering, to laugh at obsessions and disappointments, provided a model for how online communities could maintain positivity and cohesion in difficult circumstances. Silksong memes weren't just funny, they were therapeutic. The therapeutic value of community humour was recognised by mental health professionals studying online communities. The community's ability to transform pain into laughter, disappointment into connection, and uncertainty into shared experience was seen as healthy and adaptive response to challenging situations. They had accidentally created group therapy disguised as a fan community. The wait highlighted changing fandom nature in the digital age. Traditional fandom focused on consuming and discussing existing content, but the Silksong community was forced to create their own content and meaning in the absence of new official material. They became active participants in creating cultural significance of the thing they were fans of, rather than passive consumers. This active participation made the Silksong community more invested in the eventual game than typical fans might be. They hadn't just waited for Silksong, they'd helped create its cultural significance through art, theories, discussions, and memes. When the game finally arrived, they would encounter not just Team Cherry's creation, but their own collective creation built around anticipating Team Cherry's work. The creative output during the wait was staggering in volume and quality. Fan art, fan fiction, music remixes, Video essays, memes, and theoretical discussions created a vast body of work rivaling much larger creative communities. This creativity was driven by love for Hollow Knight, a need to fill the void left by Silksong's absence. Creative work also served as practice and preparation for Silksong's eventual release. Artists honed skills creating Hornet fan art. Writers explored Hollow Knight themes and world-building in fiction. Musicians experimented with Christopher Larkin's compositional style in remixes. When Silksong arrived, the community was prepared to engage at a sophistication level few fan communities could match. The Wait created unique collective memory within the community. Shared experiences of disappointment, hope, and eventual acceptance created bonds deeper than typical online relationships. Community members who'd never met in person felt like they'd been through something significant together, and they had. This collective memory became strength during the darkest moments of the Wait, when hope seemed lost, when silence from Team Cherry seemed endless. Community members could draw on shared history of surviving previous disappointments and finding ways to continue hoping. Community resilience was built on the foundation of collective experience. The community's relationship with time became increasingly philosophical as the Wait continued. They questioned time's nature, the relationship between anticipation and fulfillment, and the meaning of waiting in a culture obsessed with instant gratification. These philosophical discussions were often more profound than typical gaming discourse, perhaps because the community had been forced to confront fundamental questions about desire, patience, and satisfaction. The Wait became meditation on hope's nature itself. What does it mean to hope for something for years without guarantee it will arrive? How do you maintain hope facing repeated disappointment? What's the relationship between hope and suffering? These weren't abstract questions for the Silksong community. They were lived experiences shaping daily lives. The community's exploration of these philosophical questions wasn't purely academic. They sought practical wisdom to help navigate their unusual situation. They needed to understand how to hope without being crushed by disappointment, how to wait without wasting lives, how to find meaning in uncertainty. The answers they found were hard-won and deeply personal. The Wait also created unique anticipatory nostalgia within the community. Even before Silksong was released, members began feeling nostalgic for the experience of waiting for it. They recognized that the Wait itself had become a significant part of their lives, and they knew that once the game was released, this unique experience would be over forever. This anticipatory nostalgia led to efforts to document and preserve the waiting experience. Community members created archives of memes, screenshots of discussions and recordings of their reactions to various events during the Wait. They wanted to ensure future generations would understand what it had been like to live through this unprecedented period of gaming anticipation. Documentation efforts also served as meaning-making for the community. By treating their experience as historically significant, they found purpose and value in what might otherwise have seemed like wasted time. The Wait wasn't just something they'd endured, it was something they'd lived through together, and that made it meaningful. As the Wait entered its 6th year, the community began grappling with the possibility that Silksong might never be released. This was terrifying for a community that had organised their entire identity around anticipating the game, but it was also liberating. If they could find meaning and community in waiting for something that might never come, they'd discovered something profound about hope and human connection. The possibility of eternal waiting forced the community to confront fundamental questions about the nature of their experience. Had the years of waiting been wasted if the game never materialized? Was their community built on false premises? What would it mean if the thing that had brought them together turned out to be a mirage? These questions led to deep philosophical discussions about the nature of hope, community, and meaning. Many community members concluded that their experience had been valuable regardless of whether Silksong ever released. The friendships they'd formed, the art they'd created, the lessons they'd learned about patience and resilience, these were real and valuable even if the game that inspired them remained forever out of reach. The possibility of eternal waiting forced the community to confront whether their experience had been worthwhile even if it never led to the desired outcome. Most members concluded it had been. The friendships they'd formed, art they'd created, lessons they'd learned about patience and resilience, these were valuable regardless of whether Silksong ever materialized. This realization was both liberating and melancholy. Liberating because it freed the community from the tyranny of outcome-dependent meaning. Their experience was valuable in itself, not just as a means to an eventual end. Melancholy because it required accepting that the thing they'd waited for so long might never come. The community's evolution toward this acceptance was gradual and not universal. Yet some members couldn't let go of the hope that Silksong would eventually be released. Others embraced the possibility of eternal waiting as a form of spiritual practice. Still others found middle ground, maintaining hope while not depending on it for their sense of meaning and community. This acceptance of possible eternal waiting marked a new phase in the community's evolution. They were no longer waiting for Silksong in the desperate, anxious way they had in early years. They were waiting with serene acceptance, finding joy in the wait itself rather than just in the prospect of its eventual end. The community's evolution toward acceptance and serenity was remarkable to witness. They'd transformed from an anxious, yet desperate group of fans into something resembling a philosophical community focused on finding meaning in uncertainty and connection in shared experience. The wait had changed them, mostly for the better. This transformation wasn't complete or universal. The community still experienced moments of intense hope and crushing disappointment. But these emotional peaks and valleys were now contextualized within a broader understanding of the wait as a meaningful experience in itself, not just a prelude to something else. The community's maturation was evident in how they handled new potential disappointments. When gaming events came and went without Silksong announcements, the community's response was more measured and philosophical than in earlier years. They had learned to hold hope lightly, to find joy in the possibility without being destroyed by its absence. When Silksong was finally released in September 2025, the community's reaction was complex and multifaceted. There was joy, relief, and excitement, but there was also melancholy. Recognition that an era was ending. The wait that had defined them for so long was over, and they would have to figure out who they were without it. The announcement came appropriately during a Nintendo Direct. After years of disappointment, the community had learned to manage their expectations. Many watched with resigned acceptance rather than desperate hope. When Hornet appeared on screen and the Silksong logo materialized, the initial reaction was disbelief. "Is this real?" became the immediate response across social media platforms. Community members who'd been burned by fake leaks and false hopes couldn't quite believe that the wait was actually over. The trailer had to be watched multiple times, verified by multiple sources before the reality sank in. The emotional response was overwhelming. Years of pent-up anticipation, frustration, hope, and anxiety were released in a flood of tears, laughter, and celebration. Community members posted videos of their reactions, showing the raw emotion of people who had waited 6.5 years for this moment. But alongside the joy was a profound sense of loss. The weight that had brought the community together was ending. The shared experience that had defined their relationships was concluding. They were getting what they had always wanted. But they were also losing something precious, the anticipation that had sustained them for so long. The game itself was everything they'd hoped for and more. Team Cherry had used the extra development time wisely, creating a sequel that surpassed the original in every way. The community's faith in the developers had been vindicated, their patience rewarded, their suffering given meaning. But even as they celebrated, they mourned the end of the wait that had brought them together. Silksong was a masterpiece. The gameplay was refined and expanded, building on Hollow Knight's foundation, while introducing new mechanics that felt fresh and exciting. Hornet's moveset was distinct from the Knight's, offering new ways to navigate and combat that felt both familiar and novel. The world of Farloom was gorgeous and intricate, and filled with secrets and surprises that rewarded exploration. The story was emotionally resonant, exploring themes of identity, purpose, and connection that spoke directly to the community's experience of waiting and hoping. The music was transcendent, with Christopher Larkin creating compositions that perfectly captured the game's emotional landscape. Every aspect of the game demonstrated the care and attention that had gone into its creation during the long development period. The community's response to actually playing Silksong was fascinating to observe. Many members reported feeling overwhelmed by finally experiencing the game they had imagined for so long. Some found it difficult to separate their emotional investment in the wait from their actual experience of the game, yet others were able to engage with Silksong as a game rather than as the culmination of years of anticipation. The game's quality vindicated the community's faith in Team Cherry and their willingness to wait. Every refined mechanic, every beautiful animation, every perfect musical cue felt like justification for the years of patience. The game was worth the wait, not just because it was good, but because it was exactly the kind of careful, thoughtful, artistic creation that could only have emerged from the development process that had created it. In the weeks and months following Silksong's release, the community struggled to redefine itself. Some members drifted away, their purpose fulfilled. Others tried to recreate the experience by speculating about Team Cherry's next project. But most recognised that what they'd experienced during the wait for Silksong was unique and unrepeatable. The post-release period was marked by a kind of collective grief. The community had gotten what they wanted, but they had also lost something irreplaceable. The shared experience of waiting, hoping, and supporting each other through uncertainty was over. They had to learn how to be a community based on shared appreciation rather than shared anticipation. Some community members reported feeling empty or directionless after Silksong's release. The anticipation that had structured their relationship with gaming and with each other was gone. They had to find new sources of meaning and connection, new ways of relating to each other and to the broader gaming community, and others found that the bonds formed during the wait were strong enough to survive the end of the anticipation. The friendships, creative collaborations, and support networks that had developed during the wait continued even after its conclusion. The community had been brought together by waiting for Silksong, but it was sustained by genuine human connections that transcended any single shared interest. The legacy of the wait lives on in bonds formed between community members, art created during long years of anticipation, and lessons learned about patience, hope, and shared experience power. The Silksong community proved that waiting doesn't have to be passive suffering. It can be active, creative, meaningful experience that brings people together and teaches valuable life lessons. The cultural impact of the wait extended far beyond the gaming community. The phenomenon had demonstrated the power of authentic community formation around shared experiences of uncertainty and hope. It had shown how digital communities could provide genuine support and meaning for their members. It had proven that anticipation itself could be a form of entertainment and connection. The wait for Silksong became a case study in community psychology, marketing strategy, and the changing relationship between creators and audiences in the digital age. Researchers, marketers, and community managers studied the phenomenon to understand how authentic engagement and loyalty could be built and maintained over extended periods. The community's creative output during the wait, the art, music, writing, and analysis became a valuable cultural artifact in its own right. The body of work created by fans while waiting for Silksong rivaled the output of much larger creative communities. This fan-created content served as both a record of the wait and a testament to the creative power of dedicated communities. The philosophical insights that emerged from the community's experience of extended waiting and uncertainty became relevant to broader discussions about meaning, purpose, and human connection in the modern world. The community had accidentally conducted a years-long experiment in finding joy and meaning in uncertainty, and their conclusions were valuable for anyone struggling with similar challenges. In the end, the wait for Silksong was about more than just a video game. It was about hope, community, resilience, and human capacity to find meaning in uncertainty. It was about shared experience power to transform suffering into connection, disappointment into wisdom, and waiting into art form. The game may be over, but the lessons learned during the wait will last forever. The story of the Silksong wait will be remembered as one of the most remarkable phenomena in gaming history, a testament to community power, anticipation psychology, and human capacity to find meaning and connection in the most unlikely circumstances. It proved that sometimes the journey really is more important than the destination, and that the things we wait for together can be just as valuable as the things we eventually receive. Man's capacity to find meaning in challenging circumstances. It showed that sometimes the journey really is more important than the destination, and that things we wait for together can be more valuable than things we wait for alone.